to 4:30, so we can get started. So hi everyone, I'm Susanna. I'm a marketing coordinator here at Nelson Secondary, and I'm just going to kickstart tonight's presentation. So if I could get the slides to change. There are beautiful covers for our books coming up, and then we're just going to start with the acknowledgement of country. So in the spirit of reconciliation, Engage Australia acknowledges the traditional custodians of country throughout Australia and their connections to land, sea and community. We pay our respects to their elders past and present and extend that respect to all Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander peoples of today. And then just for a little bit of housekeeping today, this webinar is going to be recorded and it'll also be emailed out to everyone who's registered in the next 7 days. If you do have any questions, please use the Q&A function rather than the chat. There's designated question time at the end, so that way we can just come back and make sure all your questions have been answered. And then if you do have any questions about the series or anything else that pops up tonight, you can email us at os.secondary@sengage.com. And now I'm going to pass over to our wonderful panelists who are going to get started with tonight's presentation. So thank you everyone, and I hope you enjoy the session tonight.
Oh, hello everyone, it's Laurel here. Just thank you for joining us again today. It's really great that you can spare us the time to in your busy working day. So the focus of today's presentation is on how you as a practicing teacher may be able to implement the various types of practical activities in your classroom. So Susanna, just if you could go to the next slide, please. Susanna, oh, thank you. Now, hopefully you will have all found time to read through the revised study design and be familiar with many of the key changes in the study. We're not going to go back over those today, but we did just want to focus in this, this presentation, in this slide, sorry, and the following slide is to highlight the requirement within each of the outcome statements to incorporate the applied activities in your teaching and learning program. So you probably don't know these by heart, but it's just worth looking at each of the outcome statements and just identifying how these practical activities fit in. So in Area Study 1, Food Around the World, the aim here is, or the idea here is for students through the practical activities to critique the uses and adaptations of selected food from earlier cuisines in contemporary Australia. And similarly, in Area Study 2, Food in Australia, they have to critique contemporary uses of food Indigenous to Australia and those food introduced through migration. Now, you will probably be aware that the VCAA has provided a list of what they call their command terms, commonly used across the Victorian curriculum F to 10 and the VCE study designs and in the VCE examinations. However, the term critique is not actually used was not included in this list. But so just to help you a little bit, we've come up with one definition of critique that might be helpful, and that is to evaluate, it could be a theory or a practice in a detailed and analytical way. So just by looking at both of those outcome statements, you can see that what students need to do is to actually analyse the uses and adaptations of selected food from earlier cuisines in contemporary recipes. So it's really just a matter of understanding what is meant by the term. In Unit 2, this is quite a different approach here to the way in which the applied practical activities are included. So here students in Area Study 1, they need to respond to a design brief. So again, it's not asking them to write a design brief, or that could be something you might choose to do, but Belinda and Mel will go through some examples of how you might do that a little bit later on. And in Area of Study 2, students are being asked to create a food product that illustrates potential adaptation in a commercial context. Now, that can be quite challenging, but again, Belinda and Mel will talk you through both of those possible ways in which you might be able to address those outcome statements. Next slide, please, Susanna. In Unit 3 and 4 here, the students are being asked to apply principles of nutrition. So you'll understand that in Unit 3 is a really strong focus on nutrition. And here they're being asked to apply the principles of nutrition in practical activities and to examine specific dietary needs. So again, you'll need to consider how you might undertake that. In area study 2, it's looking at demonstrating practical skills to evaluate factors affecting planning and preparing healthy meals for children and families. And again, I think as Mel and Belinda work through that, they'll discuss some of the ways in which our practical activities will help you address that outcome statement. In Unit 4, here we're looking at undertaking practical activities that meet the healthy eating recommendations of the Australian Dietary Guidelines. So similarly to the way in which we just talked then about outcome 2 in Unit 3, there'll be lots of opportunities for you to be able to address that outcome statement. In Unit 4, Area Study 2, again, it's looking at through practical activities, they have to propose future solutions that reflect socio-cultural, sustainable and ethical food values and goals. So again, just ensuring that you have a really good grasp of the outcome statements and the way in which the applied practical activities are being included in each one of those. Next slide, please, Susanna. Thank you. The BCAA Food Study Design, which on pages particularly 9 to 12 specifies what are called the cross-study specifications. I'm sure you've looked at all of these already, and part of these cross-study specifications, there are 2 aspects to this. So there's the key concepts that you can see on the screen and also the applied practical activities. Now, the study design also does highlight the necessities for students to develop the ability to use and apply these concepts in all aspects of their work. Therefore, when undertaking applied practical activities, it is important to make the links and identify relationships between the applied practical activities and these key concepts. Now, obviously, they won't be able to address each key concept in a specific applied practical activity, but you might be able to get students to identify 1 or 2 of those key concepts and how they might link to the activity that they're undertaking. But Mel and Belinda will discuss these in much greater detail as they work through their presentations. So I'll pass over to Mel, who's going to work through the first part of the program with you. Thanks, Susanna.
Thanks, Laurel. Hi, everybody. Today, Belinda and I would like to step you through what the applied practical activities are, and I guess how Food Solutions has incorporated these into our new edition of the text, in the hope that you'll be able to use these to teach the key knowledge and key skills, and also how we're going to be able to get the students to then apply and demonstrate the key knowledge and key skills in a practical way. So if we go to the next slide, please. For those teachers who are currently teaching food studies, you might be very familiar with many of these applied practical activities that we see on this particular slide. And for those who will be new to teaching the study next year, this is the range of applied practical activities that could be included in your teaching and learning programs. If you're looking at the study design, these are found on page 12 as well. Now, we know through food studies, it is a practical subject, and these practical activities are a really integral part of our program and must be incorporated through all units 1 to 4. So over the next few slides, Belinda and I will share how the team have developed these practical activities throughout the text to address the key knowledge and key skills, but also thinking and keeping in mind those key concepts as outlined in our study design. We believe that hopefully that these activities will really assist you when you get down to the nitty-gritty of planning your programs, and that they are the opportunity to allow students to apply and demonstrate that key knowledge and key skills. If we look at the study design too, we'll also notice that we must be incorporating a range of these practical activities, that is at least 3, to form part of our assessments. Next slide, please. So the first practical activity that we're going to look at is the nature around a comparative food test. So if we just jump, yep. So when we look at a comparative food test, what we're thinking about is a practical activity where students will compare two food products and analysing different aspects of those products. So they might look at the nutritional content of two products. They might look at the nutritional efficacy. So do these products actually align with the Australian dietary guidelines and the knowledge we have around the Australian Guide to Healthy Eating? They might analyse the sensory properties perhaps of two different products or two similar products. They might compare and analyse the packaging or perhaps labelling of two similar products. Also, comparison analysis could be made in relation to the cost. Then what we're wanting the students to do is once they have done some analysis, they will collate that data and then we'll ask students to compare and contrast their findings. Once they've performed that part of the task, they'll then have to make some decisions based on a set criteria about those certain products and utilise that higher order thinking to then be able to justify the decision that they've made for the particular product that they have selected. So what we've done here is we've provided a particular example of a comparative food test that we've put within the textbook. So this particular comparative food test sits in the Unit 3 and 4 textbook, and it relates to Unit 3, Food in Daily Life, and in particular Area of Study 2, so Food Choice, Health and Wellbeing. And when you get to actually hold a textbook in your hand, which will be lovely for all of us. It's found in Chapter 4 and looking at that concept of Australian eating patterns. So with this particular task, a couple of the key knowledge points that I would be looking at as a teacher when I would run this activity with my class would be the key knowledge of the patterns of eating in Australia, so including recent developments, changes and trends in food purchasing and consumption behaviours. And the second key knowledge point that I would be pulling into this practical activity would be the ways in which social factors across Australia, including education, income, location, accommodation, available time, and cultural norms, influence responses to food information, food accessibility, food choices, and healthy eating. So just to give you a bit of a brief summary around this particular task, it's a task that asks students to compare and analyse two different brands of meal delivery kits. So things like HelloFresh, Dinnerly, Every Plate, those that you've probably seen advertised quite a bit and possibly even used yourselves before. So the activity could be completed either literally ordering the meal kits and having the students perhaps work in pairs to produce the two meals from the different companies, or it could be utilised and done through utilising the information that's provided on the websites. So the students need to do some analysis here when they look at both brands of the meal kit. So they're looking at things like quality of freshness of ingredients, looking at the instructions that are actually provided with each of the two kits, the nutritional balance of the meal. So even here, they're still drawing on information that they may have previously, or they should have previously learned in area of study 1, 2, when we're talking about macronutrients. So they'll be drawing in some other information that they have learned as well as these other specific key knowledge points that I spoke about earlier. They'll look at costing of each of the meals and looking at the amount of packaging and what components of that packaging potentially could be sustainable. They prepare the two meals and conduct a sensory evaluation and then have a final analysis which looks at a number of different things. So on your screen, you can see the sensory and one of the questions that has been there, but there's another section to that activity as well. So the students look at the clarity of the instructions that they were provided with. Did the end product actually even represent the product in the advertising material? And getting the students to think about whether they believe the meal is nutritionally balanced and how well it meets those recommendations of the Australian Guide to Healthy Eating. So this is a great way to look at nutritional efficacy and utilise the language of the study design with the students. Efficacy from this previous study design, we learnt that students were quite unfamiliar with that term. So it's a good way to introduce the language of the study design into these practical activities as well. Also, when we think about some of the questioning that we're asking the students to do in the analysis at the end of this task, we're also embedding those key concepts of healthy eating and drawing on information from key knowledge and key skills area of study 1, like I said earlier, when we're looking at how we go about evaluating the nutritional quality of food and meals. So the students at the end draw their analysis to make conclusions as to who they might recommend the use of the meal kits to. So here they could be thinking about social factors and the influence on food choice. So what social factors may influence people's choice to use or to not use these products? And that might even be how I would set this particular task up in the classroom, and maybe even get them to be thinking about that sort of information before we delve into actually making the kit. So within the analysis, students are applying and demonstrating their knowledge of a range of these key concepts that we see as well. So thinking about healthy eating, sustainability, innovations in technology to help them make the comparisons and then also analyse their findings. All right. Oh, sorry, next slide. That was the last part of that little activity. Cooking. So if I had to look at that list back on the previous few slides where there was a big long list of all the different applied practical activities, I think this would be, in my opinion, our students' favourite, which is cooking. It's often a really big part of the decision that our students select food studies as a subject too. So I think as teachers, it's really important for us to think carefully about the recipes we produce in class and that we put within our programs, so that we provide a really valuable opportunity for students to demonstrate demonstrate their understanding of the key knowledge and the key skills. Next slide. So cooking as a practical activity is a highly valuable task. There's many areas within units 1 to 4 where cooking is a really great vehicle to help students apply and demonstrate their knowledge. Within the new edition of the textbook, we've made sure that each of the recipes that we have selected have looked at the recommendations of the Australian Dietary Guideline, and making sure that we're reflecting and modelling those things within our program as well. So whilst we might have chosen a particular practical activity to have a particular focus on a specific key knowledge or key skill, I think each of the recipes are always opportunities for students to think about, I guess one of the things that really underpins our study, the Australian Dietary Guidelines and Australian Guide to Healthy Eating. They can also draw in the main nutrients within the dishes that they're preparing and their impact on health, and helps to underpin, again, that key concept of healthy eating. Again, while we've placed recipes within the chapter to link to those corresponding key knowledge and key skills, as I said, there's always other areas that be connected with different recipes. So if we just look at that gorgeous picture of our coconut chicken bowl with Asian slaw, you could also talk about food trends and one bowl meals. You could have a discussion around the trend, on trend flavors and ingredients. You could talk about ethical production of food, heat transfer methods, gelatinization. The list is almost endless to some degree, and I'm sure you come up with many links. So whilst the recipes sit within each of the chapters, they could also be utilised to draw in other information and knowledge that the students have been learning. And another example is in Unit 3, Area of Study 2, where the students are asked to demonstrate practical skills to evaluate factors affecting planning and preparing healthy meals for children and families. Cooking is a great opportunity for students to think about the behavioural principles of modelling, exposure and repetition, and how they can establish these healthy and nutritious meal patterns. The students could look at these recipes, or a recipe in particular, and look at how it could be broken down to allow younger children to be involved in the preparation of that particular dish. So therefore encouraging some family participation in the daily food prep and looking at that key knowledge area. So I kind of feel bad that we're showing all these lovely recipes when it's 10 to 5, and perhaps some of your minds might be, you know, wandering a little bit and thinking, oh, what shall I have for dinner? With any luck, hopefully these photos might be a little bit of inspiration for your dinner ideas tonight. But yes, I do apologize that my stomach is grumbling and I'm hoping you actually can't hear it. So just with our gorgeous chicken sliders, we have put at the end of each recipe a set of 5 evaluation questions that the students can also attempt after they have completed that particular practical activity of cooking. So the questions are a way that we can get students to think about the food they have just made and then apply that particular area of key knowledge and the key skill that they've been working on. This particular recipe sits in Unit 3 area of Study 1, where students should be able to explain the process of eating and digesting food and the utilisation of the macronutrients. So this is one of our first recipes, which I think also too would really engage students, because it's something that I think they would really like to be eating. So it's located in Chapter 1, Eating and Digesting Food. So the questions that we've provided around the evaluation have been designed to provide the students with that opportunity to show things like, you know, how protein is utilised in the body, and to show their thinking as to why they might not be hungry after eating those sliders in particular. So the evaluation questions are also another opportunity where appropriate that we can link to those underlying key concepts. So again, I mean, healthy eating is quite easy to pull into many of our recipes. We might look at food citizenship, our food systems and sustainability. And again, you can draw those into those recipes. They also provide an opportunity for us to start to be doing some work with our students about responding to some of those higher order thinking questions and those command terms that Laurel spoke about earlier. We have seen in the current or the study design for next year that there has been some emphasis on the change of command terms with that higher order thinking in mind. So these evaluation questions can be a good area where our students can start to have a practice at answering questions and the things that the requirements that they might need in order for an explain question or an evaluate question or a justify. So one of the ways that I would use these in my classroom, often if we do finish a prac a little bit earlier, which is not often, but if we were to, the students could then do that set of questions or start them in class, and then it might be a homework task. Sometimes it's a really good way from a teaching perspective to have a very quick understanding, or for me to check the students' understanding quite quickly. And perhaps it might even be that I only get them to answer 2 and I really want to have a focus on maybe explaining how protein is utilised, and perhaps that's their exit card after their cooking, and I might even verbally ask them one of those evaluation questions. The next slide is an activity that goes along or can complement the cooking of the chicken sliders. So what we're asking in this practical activity is that the students make the chicken sliders with our soy and ginger glaze. And then what they do is they access an image of the digestive system as shown in that image, and they annotate that diagram to show the digestive system and the processes involved in eating and digesting the macronutrients that make up the slider. So we've talked about the meat patty, the burger bun, and the Kewpie mayonnaise. So then getting the students to think about, okay, well, which macronutrients are within those ingredients, and then they annotate how they are digested in that particular image. Now, that particular activity could almost be put into play, well, probably could be with every recipe that is in our textbook. So always giving the students a different opportunity to have a look at the information and how they might apply that information and their knowledge to a new situation. So with cooking as well, these are our lovely Middle Eastern sausage rolls, which is a new recipe that sits in our Unit 1 and 2 text found in Chapter 11 under Food Product Development. So once the students have completed a cooking task, It can also link to another applied practical activity. So with the preparation of the Middle Eastern sausage rolls, perhaps the students also then do a sensory analysis where they could have some discussion around qualitative analysis and then how that concept is utilised in food product development. In the class, the students, and I don't want to steal Belinda's thunder too much here, we will be talking about focus groups, but perhaps they could form a little focus groups to complete their sensory analysis where they can share and discuss the properties of these particular foods. Again, they also could do a comparative test where they look at a traditional sausage roll compared to the Middle Eastern sausage roll that they've just produced. So if we think about this recipe or this image just on the screen, it also, again, incorporates those key concepts. So healthy eating. So you might have a discussion around why, and I apologise for my pronunciation if it is incorrect, Katifi pastry might be considered a healthier option compared to the puff pastry. Or we might look at food citizenship and have a discussion as to why some consumers might prefer or choose to eat lamb dishes rather than those made of beef or pork. So there's so much scope within the cooking to be able to teach our key knowledge and key skills. Now, the next applied practical activity is when we start to think about creating and responding to design briefs. So creating and responding to design briefs is something that our students should have been or will have been exposed to during the 7 to 10 curriculum. But I guess what we need to keep in mind, I suppose, is that not every school and every student will have had a lot of exposure to this. We know that in some schools, a student might have only experienced a trimester, perhaps, of food studies way back in year 7. And now they've decided to pick up this wonderful subject in year 10, 11 or 12. And we might be teaching some key knowledge through the students responding to a design brief. So we might actually just have to step back and spend, I'm not saying spend a week on this or anything, but we might just spend a little bit of time refreshing the students' memories with how we go about creating and responding to design briefs. It might also be something to note that the design processes and the design brief definitions have been added to the glossary of terms that the VCAR have provided with the implementation of this new study. So it would probably be a good idea at some point to jump on there and have a look. Now, with these definitions in this glossary, my understanding is that these are teacher reference. So they're not definitions that we would expect our students to recall word for word, like perhaps was the case in the old days, but they're more so that teachers have a very clear understanding of what's involved when we talk about the design process. So we talk about a process that involves investigating, generating, economic planning, and managing, producing and evaluating to create a design solution that considers social, economic, and environmental factors. Our design brief being that concise statement clarifying the project task and defining the need or opportunity to be resolved. It usually identifies the user specifications, criteria for success, available resources, timeframe for the project. So it just might be worthwhile jumping into that glossary list and having a look at those terms there as well. So the example that we see in the next slide, before I jump to that bit, sorry, I did want to say and reiterate what Laurel said at the start, is that design briefs can be tackled two ways. We can have students create their own design brief, or they can respond to a teacher designed or a pre-written design brief. Either is fine. So in both examples that I'll show you today, this and the next slide, we would work with an already prepared design brief. So the example on this particular slide is taken from our 3-4 text with a particular focus on Unit 4, Area of Study 2, where we look at environment and ethics. It provides the students with an opportunity to demonstrate the key skill when we think of that key skill of describing global food security and explaining possible pathways to achieving food security. So this design brief asks the student in summary, to prepare a meal for 4 people that costs no more than $10 and ensure the meal is nutritionally sound and based on the principles of the Australian Guide to Healthy Eating. So again, you can see that underlying concept of healthy eating being brought into this task that the students will perform. So they go through the process, investigating some suitable ingredients and meal ideas to ensure it's also low cost. So we're thinking about that economic planning. The task will see students drawing on knowledge from Unit 3, area of Study 1, where they're thinking again about the macronutrients needed by the body and which foods they will then choose to ensure that the meal is nutritionally sound. So again, drawing on that information and that understanding of the Australian Guide to Healthy Eating and Australian Dietary Guidelines. They'll generate 3 recipes. They'll go through the planning and managing stage, completing a food order. They'll produce the dish in class, and then they'll have that time to evaluate their meals based on their previously developed criteria. Now, again, if time didn't prevail in your classes, the students could plan the task, but then not necessarily produce the meal, although it would be a very cost-effective one if we're thinking about budgets. But yes, they could just do that component and then not look at the producing, and they could still then evaluate the task and have that discussion as well within the classroom. All right, and my very last one, because I am also very conscious of time, is demonstrations. Oh no, I missed one. I apologize. It's because I'm trying to go quickly because it's 5 o'clock. The second little design brief, very similar, that just this one draws on information from Unit 2, Area of Study 1, Australia's Food Systems, and looks at the key knowledge point where we might want to teach the steps in the process of developing a new food product using design briefs. So research, design, innovation, product testing, production, evaluation, and marketing. So the little design brief here is there's 2 friends that are going on a road trip, and students use their understanding of the design process to design food products and adapt recipes to suit the different needs and circumstances within that brief that they would need to look at. So within the brief, it's possible to focus on a certain part of the, within the design process, it's possible to focus on a certain part of the process rather than, not necessarily having to follow the whole process all the way through. So again, if I was maybe doing this one in class as an introduction to looking at design briefs and food product development, perhaps I might just focus on part A, which is the designing and the investigating, and getting the students to really have a good understanding of what it is that that design brief is asking them to do. Okay, now it's the last one, demonstrations. We need to be mindful with demonstrations as an applied practical activity, that these are demonstrations that are carried out by the student, not the teacher. So just something to keep in mind. Next slide. So again, demonstrations can really allow students to demonstrate a range of key knowledge and key skills. So when we look just on this slide, the list, so it might allow the student to identify the key steps in a particular recipe, perform a particular skill for others to observe, be able to explain the functional properties of key ingredients or processes that they see within a particular recipe. They might organise their information and make a plan, explain connections or procedures, outline what success looks like, use it as a tool for revision, or perhaps work in a small team. So one of the ones, the example's not up on the slide, but just to talk you through one in about 30 seconds, we've got one in our Unit 3 and 4 textbook in Chapter 5, the social and emotional roles of food. What it's asking the students to do is think about thinking about a favourite food of theirs that's linked to perhaps their culture, their religion, or a significant celebration within the student's family. Then again, the way I would do this is possibly set it as a homework task. Ask the students to prepare and video record, just using iMovie or whatever they use off their phones, to produce this recipe And then what they can do is they can either make an annotation or a voiceover in response to a set of particular questions linking to key knowledge. So we look at the key knowledge point of the social and emotional roles in food in shaping and expressing individual identity and connectedness, including its sharing and celebratory role within families, peer groups, and communities. So then the lovely finale to that could be that each of the students, once they've pulled their little video down to a minute, is that they have that presented in class. And even then, it's another way to show that food and how it connects people. So that could be a really lovely activity to do in class, but they are doing a lot of the work outside of the classroom. So I will pass over to Belinda and hope that she can speak really quickly.
Thanks, Mel. Thanks, Susanna. I'll have the next slide. Okay, well, I have the opportunity to talk to you about a lot of the analysis practical activities. And what we've done here is just put a little Venn diagram together, because for some of our students, and sometimes us when we're sort of planning these activities, there can be crossovers. So there's similarities and differences. So what I want to do in the next little while is just talk to you about how we have unpacked them to show you what we think are going to fit in with some of our key knowledges and key skills for different areas of the study design. You'll see we've put the nutritional analysis in the centre of these diagrams because, in fact, that's not a standalone practical activity in the VCAR list at the moment. I'm not sure. It can fit under diet. It is listed under dietary as one version. But I think when we're doing a nutritional analysis, it actually can fall under a product analysis because you can analyse a product in many different ways, including nutritionally, or with our dietary analysis, it can fall under there. So thanks, Susanna. All right, so what is a dietary analysis? Well, really, what we're trying to do is where the student is determining or undertaking a nutritional assessment of the food in some form, and there's different ways. The example that we're giving here is the sushi bowl in our Unit 1 and 2 book, which is Food in Contemporary Australia. We've got a great recipe there that's presented nicely. It's using tofu, and we're getting the students to analyse the sort of portions in that one meal. And of course, sometimes students are not familiar what portion sizes are. So that leads us back to the Guide to Healthy Eating, and then doing some using that as an activity where they actually understand what a serving size can look like. You could use this as a predict idea to start with, and then when they actually drill down and actually go to the Eat for Health program and check what a serving size is, maybe weigh or do some sort of more scientific version of it, they might find that their predictions is wrong. And I find that then when I do these sorts of analysis where they're looking at serving size, they haven't really got a great idea. So doing it in a practical way rather than just reading the textbook is a much better way for them to understand how much food they actually should be eating each day. So here we're also bringing in key knowledge about the Australian Guide to Healthy Eating, portion sizes, and the Australian Dietary Guidelines, which we know is in the Eat for Health section or healthy eating cross-curriculum specification or key issues is really underpinning everything that we're doing. Also here, we can be looking at sustainability, looking at the use of a plant-based meat. We've used tofu, but you could use any other sorts of either a plant-based meat. They could use even a cheese type, a halloumi or something like that. We're looking at food systems, developing the paddock to plate sort of concept, or food sovereignty and food citizenship principles in looking at this dietary analysis. What also I would like to talk to you about is that with that diet analysis, we don't only look at food. So if we go to the next slide, you'll see that we've got in our Unit 3 Unit 3 book in Outcome 2, we really looked at, we've got a quiz, and we've listed a number of other credible sources of quiz where students can actually analyse their own diet and then use that to look at their own diet and critically analyse it. And I think Mel talked about the command words, and it's really important that we are using that language when we are discussing and working with our students with these key knowledge, so that they become so familiar with them that they're not really, it just becomes second nature. So this is a quiz that the students can undertake, but we have researched a couple more, and you could even use this in terms of getting students to think about, well, is this credible dietary information that we're getting? And bring in that aspect of credible research and information about food information. Ultimately, the purpose of a traditional dietary analysis, and some of us may have done this in the past, where students might track their food over a 24-hour period or over a long period of time, is so that we can look at the typical food choices that we're using today and in portions, and then identify any stresses or emotions or characteristics from some of our other chapters and key knowledge points where they're looking at what are food issues today, looking at contemporary trends, those sorts of things. So while it sits here, there are many ways in which you can use a dietary analysis in this form. With the Year 12 students, you could take them to the Eat for Health guide, which is linked in a lot of our work in here, where students can look at the portions for an adolescent, make it real for them, but teaching them that also, while we want to engage with data, that's going to be really important for their key skill development for examinations and for SACs. Other forms of dietary analysis could be where they're analysing the quantity and quality of a commercial meal or something that they make in another area. So with Mel's cooking, they could be cooking, and then they could analyse the nutritional quantity of that. They could calculate, they could even analyse, we've got dietary analysis. That could also include a fad diet, linking that against the Australian Dietary Guidelines, again, when we're looking back to Chapter 2 for Unit 3, Outcome 1. Remember that with all of these analysis activities, students are going to need to make judgments. They're going to engage with the information and then be able to justify their thinking. And so these analysis activities are, again, as Mel suggested before, some of the more higher order thinking. And we need to scaffold our students, but they need to be practicing them throughout the Unit 1 to 4 schedule. And as we said at the start, when you're planning your activities, really important to expose the students in each outcome of these different analysis tasks. So we've given you opportunities in the way that we've done that. And when we talk later on in the year about our scope and sequence charts, we've actually this year going to scope and sequence the practical activities against the key knowledge as well. So I think that will be really helpful for you. The other thing that the students can do once they've done a sort of a dietary analysis is modify a recipe to make it healthier. So using the concept of a dietary analysis to then springboard to develop other skills like modifying, adjusting recipes to make them healthier. They could even find their own, in the food and media chapter, use their own, find their own stimulus material on social media, such as TikTok, one of those, and then analyse that information based on some of the questions that we've got. Okay, thanks, Susanna. So nutritional analysis. So you see that with a lot of the activities, we are giving you formats that allow students to input the data that they're going to discover when they follow these nutritional analysis activities. And with this, we're really going to be looking at the different amount of nutrients in a particular food. So we're looking at the nutritional information panel. The students are going to be really looking at the nutrients that are generated in per 100 grams. This links us to food labels. So if you don't have time to do this activity in the chapter 2 where it sits, you might do it when you are looking at food labels in that chapter. But in this section here, we've sat this activity in our Unit 3-4 book in chapter 2, where students are going to evaluate that nutritional quality of a prepared main meal using food labels. So really we want them to analyse the nutritional quality of these meals based on that food label. Again, reinforcing the key concepts of healthy eating. In this case, it could be sustainability. We're looking at our legume and our wellness bowls based on the butter chicken. It could be looking at the food system area. And we've given quite detailed instructions on how to do these activities and the sorts of analysis that we would want students to do. So looking at what an average adult, and most of our students at 17, 18 can be classified close to that, how much they would need per day, kilojoules, and then looking at one meal or the other, which is going to be better. They might look at one, the wellness bowl that's got the grains, and make some sort of analysis about that's going to provide more nutrients than the butter chicken where it's just more of a meat-based things. We could be looking at the food label as well in this activity, where they might look at allergens or what's an important aspect on food labels, what's compulsory information, etc. We could look at the trend for these meals where every year, I think that section of the supermarket grows. What's the trend driving those? We can refer that back to the social aspect of food, the constant time pressures, convenience and things like that when we're looking at ready-made meal in one of our analysis questions. But overall, we're really looking at analysing information on food labels. We know that we've seen similar sorts of activities turn up on exams where we've had to compare that nutritional labels of 2 yogurts and make sort of some judgments. So really we're getting students to practice those skills in the real life, but make, again, the key knowledge and the key skills come alive, justifying. And, in this sort of situation, you could, have like a little mini debate if different students in the class can come up with different reasons for that. Okay, thank you. Okay, so then we get to a product analysis. Okay, so there are many different ways that you can do a product analysis where we're identifying and comparing the characteristics of a featured product. We could do that in a SWOT analysis. So very simple activity, which doesn't take a long time. You could identify things on the packaging, such as marketing methods and techniques. You could look at health star ratings versus the tick. You could look at emotive marketing on children's products appealing to parents. You could even, if you're not looking at the product in front of you, you could do a product analysis using the website. I've done one with like Easy when I've been looking at weight loss products, but it's entirely up to you. And what we've tried to do with the practical activities too is be really mindful of schools' budgets. We know that times are tough for schools as well as students. So if you don't want to buy the products, then definitely take the opportunity to use the website to do that, or buy sample products. And I sometimes do that, and then I laminate the packaging, and then I've got it to use in future activities. So we're looking at the cost there. With the product analysis though, they could do a taste test as well. We could, and that links later on to our sensory analysis. We could look at health and nutritional claims and look at, health claims, general level health claims, high level health claims, things like that. Another way that you could do this is annotate the diagram of a label or the food product and discuss the different factors that contribute to food choice for consumers choosing this product. And again, as the name suggests, analysis. So we're asking students to think, to analyse, to use different pieces of information and data and make sure that they can develop a logical argument in terms of an assessment of the product. The one here that we've got in chapter 2 is we're really looking at meal replacement shakes as a weight loss product and how to analyse that. We've looked at another way to do it is really looking at the key knowledge and the key skills of looking at credible sources of information, evidence information. What does accurate analysis of data mean? So using the language of the study design in the practical activities, not just in the key knowledge, to deepen students' experiences with those. Okay, next one, thanks. Okay, so with this activity, we recognise that we do need to talk about discretionary foods, and you might think, well, how does a Monte Carlo biscuit fit into the Guide to Healthy Eating or the Australian Dietary Guidelines? But our students do need to understand the skills when we're doing cooking, of heat transfer skills, the functional properties. Making a biscuit is quick, cost effective, and helps to deepen those skills as well. But the way we've used this is also looking at it in a product development way and looking at a homemade version of a commercially available biscuit. And I did this sort of activity when we were in lockdown, and students were then talking about how the comfort food aspect, emotional connection to food, people were having memories about biscuits made with grandmas and things like that. So thinking about food choice, and the emotion associated with food, I think works really well here. So that would be linked to our key issues around food. We can justify this in that, you know, it's not the healthiest recipe, but looking at to discretionary food or every now and again type foods, looking at foods from the food system and even environmental sustainability, you can bring those aspects of these biscuits in. So a product analysis can be just one product, or you could compare the two where we're justifying, you know, what the different characteristics are in each of those biscuits. Again, with the recipes that we've developed, you'll see that there's always 5 evaluation questions. And they're a fantastic opportunity as well to drill down on the evaluation and the analysis aspect of that cooking session or the product development session or the dietary analysis session, where we're really trying to get students to practice. Sometimes I set those for homework. In this case, sometimes you might just use it as a checking for understanding activity in the classroom before they leave. So there's a range of different ones there that we can do with that product analysis. Sometimes we think, well, how do we record this information if we want to use something similar to this for an assessment where we have to keep records of our product analysis? Well, if you use some of our scaffolded tables, that can work. But of course, students, you could just do a 1-page SWOT analysis. You could get the students to do an audio visual, or they can interview their fellow classmates where you make it a little bit of fun, and one can be the interviewer and one can answer. They could do a little video where they're uploading it. Really important, I think, that you do keep some clear records with students so that they can use those to revise with or get ready if you're going to use something similar to this in a assessment. Okay, thank you, Susanna. Next slide. Scientific experiments. Well, when we had the last study design came about, these were introduced. Some of us were sort of doing them by stealth, but now it's become an integral part. And sometimes we don't feel as teachers necessarily confident in developing some of these scientific experiments could say, oh, I'm not a science teacher. But in fact, we are scientific teachers of food, chemistry, and etc. So we'll go to the next slide. These have all been set up to support you. I really love actually doing the scientific experiments because they really promote discovery, learning and curiosity. They're student-centred, and sometimes, and I think this year maybe we're noticing it more, practicing teachers, that students want us to deliver more knowledge, but taking it back to a student-centred activity where they have to start to predict what might happen or draw on knowledge that they've previously done. It promotes group work and collaborative learning. So I think that's been a really good way of incorporating the scientific experiments into my lesson plans there. They definitely develop critical thinking and higher ordering before they even start, where sometimes they may need to predict or hypothesize about what might happen. We're introducing new ideas through a scientific experiment because they may not have done that before. This practical activity in chapter 13, where we're looking at cooking carrots. So you will know, if you've had an opportunity to look at the study design in detail, is that the cooking food concepts or key knowledge aspects of Unit 3 Outcome 1 have been transferred to Unit 2. So we have transferred a lot of that information and some of the activities, but this is a new one that we've put together because a scientific experiment shouldn't be detailed, it shouldn't take long. And I've just looked at the time and realised that no one's given me a, you're running out of time, Belinda, wave of my finger. So here we are looking at carrots, looking at a healthy food. What are the different transfer methods? We've given you different ways to cook: boiling, steaming, microwaving, roasting. Students can make prediction about what the colour and the texture might be. They then might make a judgment or analyse what's the best colour, what's the best texture, the best flavour. Again, I'm going to say to my students, best, what does that mean? How are you using that to come to your conclusions, and then identify and explain the different methods of heat transfer? And even using this template, you could use some green vegetables in the classroom, some groups doing carrots, and look at the difference in the way that they cook up in the different areas. They don't have to be long, but of course, what we're getting students to do is really to predict. And then say, have their predictions come through correctly, or do they need to adjust their thinking? How does that link to the key knowledge and the key skills of heat transfer methods or wet and dry cooking methods, etc.? Okay, we better move along. Thanks, Susanna. Okay, so here we've talked about the functional ingredient. We've got another activity here where we're looking at the pH levels of food. So again, this is what students might expect in a scientific experiment as opposed to that last one. But what I think is really great when I've done this activity is once that the students have done them and they've lined them up in pH order, it's really interesting to see all of the different foods and where they come out. Have they been able to predict that correctly, and then making some conclusions about the different acidic, alkaline. And then that's going to take you back into the chapter where you're going to look at the key knowledge and talk about, well, what do acids do in the functional aspects of cooking? And what do acidic foods? And what are neutral foods? So that's what we're trying to get the students to understand, then how that might be used in the functions of food. Recording their results, well, again, they can be using grids that we will have on MindTap. They can be using photographic records. I always get my students to photograph them, so then they've got a record and it helps them when they're revising. But you could choose a number of different foods and students could develop their own tables there. Okay, next slide. Okay, this last one is actually, we're going to cook products. And the scientific aspect is we're looking at egg white protein versus plant-based protein. Here's a great way of bringing in those key concepts of sustainability in the food system, linking it to plant-based versus traditional cooking. I'm really hurrying up now. You could then tap on the scientific experiment of making it, collecting your data, looking at, then adding on a sensory analysis. So students would look at, is there a difference between a plant-based protein versus the egg protein? So there's a little bit more in that. Again, though, by using a vegan meringue, we can then bring in the concepts of healthy eating, issues in food such as the rise in veganism, flexitarianism, even in the technology aspect of plant-based meats. Okay, thank you. I'm sorry I'm rushing a little bit, but I am conscious of your time, so we'll go to the next slide. So there's three different ways that we've set up the scientific experiments, and you'll find some further ones in the books so that you can use one in each of the outcomes in Unit 1 to 4. Okay, a sensory analysis could include a taste testing, and we talked about the use of focus groups at the start. That's a slight change and focus in the new study design. So we'll go to the next slide. And really, because when we're doing any sort of sensory analysis or taste testing or developing new products in our design briefs, or when we're looking at product development, the focus group is part of that industry best practice. And so we want to be able to replicate that in our key knowledge and key skills with the students and get them to understand the sort of the real world concepts of using focus groups. In this practical activity where we're looking at food trends, we're really focusing on what are some of the new products. Now, while we're looking at a popular food trends, this could also go into gut health, knowing that kombucha is one of the foods that can link to that. So it could go into Unit 3, Outcome 1. We're going to identify and categorize sensory properties in particular products. Students need to rate the personal perceptions of a product. They could use a focus group. So in this activity, I just want to focus on the focus group activity. What students are going to do is gather their data, then get in a focus group and make some decisions and some justifications about which product is better and why. Really, they could also look at why is kombucha a popular trend, look at the innovations in technology in the key concepts and the issues in food and gut health. And is it healthy? Or in this one, I make my own kombucha, so I might even bringing my own kombucha in, looking at it as a commercial product and which one would the students say that they taste better. They'll probably say the commercial one because it has got sugar in it, etc., etc. So using those sorts of things to help them understand how a sensory analysis can link into the other key knowledge areas, because we know a sensory analysis sits very well with cooking, but they need to be able to do something with it. And a focus group also, when we're doing a focus group, when we're looking at the commercial aspects, perhaps we'll go to the next slide. That's where you might get them to understand how is setting up a good sensory analysis and industry-based sensory analysis. So only looking at one product at a time, drinking between, making sure that there's no stimulus in terms of smells around and no other stimulus material, so they can really focus on the food. With this activity, we've actually got that one in Chapter 5 in our Unit 1 and 2 book, where we're looking at Indigenous food cultures. And so again, this one links to the key concept of the Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander knowledge, culture and history, but it could work under healthy eating, but also it would we could look at this in terms of migration in Australia and food trends. So we're going to compare the flavour profile of two styles of riata. So students are going to make them using our traditional recipes, but you could buy even a tzatziki and use it and they could make the Indigenous one too. So again, it just depends on schools, individual issues, your budget, your time, etc. We're looking at sensory properties, and then we're getting students to rate. With this one, we could definitely use the data that we've got there. We could do that profiling testing where they're going to set up a star diagram to, from a commercial point of view, pull out individual elements of the individual dishes and make sure that students can say, well, you know, if one's got very little flavour, how do we increase that? What are the ingredients? How can we change those sorts of things there? But certainly there's lots of scope for the sensory analysis and taste testing. And the good thing about a taste testing where you're buying prepared products is it's actually a low cost. You can do it in half an hour. The students get a lot out of it, but they are deepening their key knowledge and their key skills and using the language that we need them for assessment. Okay, next slide. And I'm sorry I rushed, but that's a very brief overview of all of the activities or all of the types of activities that we've really thought long and hard about in the way that we've worded them, the way that we think that really, even though we've set them within a chapter, there are so many other ways that you can use them. So if you don't use it in that chapter, you might use it as a revision activity or whatever. But we're more than happy to talk in the question and answer time, but I'm going to hand over to Anne-Marie because she's going to talk to you about the last slides. So thanks very much, everybody.
Thank you, Belinda. And again, conscious of time for everyone and this time of the evening, I'll keep this very brief. So delightful to see the comprehensive and contemporary resources available for students, so inspiring. And thank you so much for the cooking ideas for this afternoon. So the book listing options open to you are for book 1 and 2, 3 and 4. You have the blended print and digital product or digital only via Nelson MindTap. So the student book and Nelson MindTap is $80.95 and the Nelson MindTap digital only is $49.95. Susanna, can you move to the next slide? So this is, I'm sure many of you have had interactions with us over the time. This is our Victorian team. There's myself, Kim Lowe, and Gillian Lim. We're a very friendly and helpful bunch of people, so feel free to reach out to us with any queries or if you'd like a further meeting or a demo of Nelson MindTap. Thank you very much. Over to you, Laurel.
Thank you again, everyone, for coming, and we hope you found today to be really very helpful and it's given you some ideas for how you might approach the new study next year. Just to remind you that we do have 2 further webinars coming up. So we're planning one for late October where we will look at the scope and sequence programs for units 1 and 3. We've decided to do it late October, so it gives you a chance, if you're doing a Head Start program, to have your planning in place for Head Start in the beginning of November. We will also provide a further webinar probably in later November for units 2 and 4 to go through some scope and sequence with you then, so that you can get your planning underway for 2023. And we'll also talk to you a little bit about our social media updates and how we intend to ensure that the currency of the book is kept up to date, so that you've got lots of new examples of ideas, information and new concepts that are coming up, or new issues that are being addressed in the media itself. So lots to look forward to. So we hope that we'll see you in late October and again in November. So thank you again for your time today, and we hope you have great success with the new textbook. Thanks, everyone.
Thanks, everyone. And thank you to everyone for there's a little bit of an echo. We've just got one question in the Q&A at the minute, and it just says, Vika previously said there's a range of practical records that was two or more. So it says, I think you needed to cook 3 or more times, but only 2 of them needed to be for assessment with record. Is this the same for 2023? Or do we just need to do 3 practical assessments when they say range next year? If that makes sense. I think I butchered that question. So if you need me to reread, I definitely will. To our panelists.
Laurel, do you want to speak or do you want me to?
No, Belinda, you go ahead.
Okay, so yes, I can actually see that question, so I'll pop it up. The range of practical records, so the way everybody sets their program up is different, but when we're looking at assessment is different to delivering the learning program. So today what we've tried to show you is a range of ideas that can be used on a regular basis, weekly or fortnightly, however often you want to do them, to prepare students for assessment. Now, in the assessment aspect, or SACS, it says they do need to have 2 with records, but you do still need to do 3, which is the range. So that it's still basically the same as it has been, is the way. But I think the way the start of the new study design is really talking about that they, and probably anyone that's been audited or is new, is that you need to show in your assessments a range. You can't do all sensory analysis and you can't do all cooking. So that's why we've gone into a lot of detail to show you all the different ones, so that you should be rotating those activities through your assessment program to make sure students have a really good understanding of all of them. So starting off at Unit 1 and then Unit 2, Unit 3 and Unit 4. So I try to do at least one of those in each outcome, because I have a kitchen spot each week, but my students know that it's not only cooking. But the other thing is you can do a little taste test in half an hour, and that could be just, Friday afternoon lesson 7 when they're a little bit cranky, but knowing that a taste test with a little sensory analysis or a food comparison will keep them on track. So does that make sense? Did I explain that correctly, Laurel?
I think you've done very well, Belinda.
All right. So, well, again, I'd like to thank everyone and hope that you found it useful. I think, as Susanna said, you will get a copy of this presentation in a couple of weeks. So if you weren't able to, or a colleague wasn't able to join us tonight, then you'll be able to look at it as a faculty or as a team. So thank you.
Thank you, everyone. I'm going to stop the recording now.